Today's video is all about the Autumn Equinox, or Mabon, on the Wheel of the Year. So to discover all about this Sabbat, some history, some folklore, ways that you can celebrate, some herbs and other correspondences that go along with, and to see a special treat that I'm baking in the kitchen, then do get yourself a nice hot drink. How about a pumpkin coffee or hot chocolate? Settle back, relax and enjoy. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me for today's video. I hope that you are doing well and enjoying the start of autumn. We are now in September and it is so exciting. I can feel the air has changed. There is just a feeling in the air and it's like my favourite time of year. It is the season of the witch after all now, and I absolutely love this season. I know so many other witches do, and especially Samhain, which is coming up, so we'll be talking about that next time. But for today we're going to be talking about Mabon, or Mabon, or the Autumn Equinox. This is a Sabbat on the Wheel of the Year. I've discussed a little bit about the Wheel of the Year in some of the other videos, but I am planning to make a dedicated video on the Wheel of the Year to explain that a little bit more. But essentially, the Wheel of the Year is a modern day pagan construction of celebrations. It was created in 1974 by Aidan Kelly. The holidays Ostara and Mabon were named by Aidan Kelly specifically, and Aidan Kelly chose the name Ostara, which was listed in Bede's Reckoning of Time, a historian, and Ostara was the name of a goddess, Eosta. Kelly took this name to refer to the spring equinox, and for Mabon, instead of choosing something that was actually related to that time of year, like Eosta, the goddess, to refer to this Sabbat by, Aidan Kelly actually chose something that was more just potentially linked. So Mabon was a god, and I will go into that a little bit more detail. So the Wheel of the Year is made up of 8 holidays. 4 of them are solar festivals. They are the Autumn Equinox and the Spring Equinox, Ostara and Mabon, named so by Aidan Kelly, and the Summer and Winter Solstice. And the cross-quarter days are the fire festivals. They are ancient Celtic, Irish Celtic, usually, festivals. And these were all put together in this Wheel of the Year for pagans and witches to celebrate, and it is a modern reconstruction of celebration. And I say that because some of these celebrations weren't celebrated by everybody, and they weren't celebrated in the same way across the globe. Depending on whereabouts you were in the world, this would have affected how you celebrated a season or a celebration. And so many of these celebrations on the Wheel of the Year do have similar folklore and history to them, and then some of them have quite strange, diverse differences. So it's just important to bear in mind that it wasn't always celebrated in these ways, but there are customs that have come in over time that have become folklore, and it's just something that now some people do like to celebrate and other people choose not to celebrate certain festivals as well. It's personally my feeling that it's nice to celebrate a Sabbat through the season. That way you don't have to worry about it all being on one day. But also that it's really nice to celebrate your season where you are. So if the correspondences connected to a Sabbat don't exactly match up with where you are, then I think it is perfectly reasonable to develop your own celebrations around something, or to not celebrate something at all. So it is something that's very personal, and we can talk more about this in another video as well. So the Autumn Equinox occurs on September 21st in the Northern Hemisphere, and it's one of those Sabbats that's rather strange because there are records of lots of celebrations and feasting at this time to do with harvest, but there weren't any real official celebrations for the Autumn Equinox. If Aidan Kelly had chosen to name this holiday as he did with Ostara, it is most likely that he would have chosen Heilig, which meant holy month, and that is what the English historian Bede referred to that time as. Mabon is linked to a Welsh god, Mabon ap Modron, which I'm probably saying completely wrong. Mabon appears within the Mabinogi as well as several of King Arthur's tales. The literal translation of Mabon ap Modron is son of the mother. And Aidan Kelly actually talks a little bit about how he decided to make this choice within his article, which I will link below. In Stations of the Sun, Ronald Hutton writes extensively about the celebrations that would have taken place around harvest time. So the harvest started at Lunasa and would have continued through the end of summer to Mabon, and then the final harvest is Samhain. So the harvest is kind of an ongoing thing, and I've talked a little bit about this in the Lunasa video as well, but it was a time of reaping what you sown and great celebration and feasting and enjoying your crops and merriment, and a lot of service as well. So many people were working really, really hard at this time to gather all this produce, but also they were being paid, they were being treated well if they did their jobs well. They were given ale to drink, to celebrate, and Ronald Hutton discusses this at length in Stations of the Sun. So some of the earliest records, I believe, that were found were from the 13th century. So this really does make harvest celebration a ancient celebration. It's also noted that this kind of feasting after a long day of hard work dates back to the ancient Romans. So we can see this kind of merriment happening for a reason. It's a very significant one because of course it's about your livelihood. It's about having enough food to get you through the winter. It's about having the livestock. It's about having plenty of corn, plenty of wheat, barley, all of that stored away safely so you can feast throughout the winter and enjoy the fruits of your labor. For that reason, we can see a lot of themes of abundance, joy, giving. Thanksgiving obviously happens a little bit later in the year. It is definitely a time of gratitude as well, gratefulness. And I think presents, being present with people, not presents that you give to people, but actually gifts, definitely. I do feel there's a resonance there. And just your presence with people. I feel like it's a really, really important time to enjoy the people that you love in your life. These are some of the themes that I see echoed throughout all the harvest kind of celebrations in folklore and history. There is a record of a celebration for Harvest Home that was recorded by a German writer, Paul Henser, and this is about a Harvest Home celebration in the English Renaissance, and it reads as follows. We happened to meet some country people celebrating Harvest Home. Their last load of corn they crowned with flowers, having besides an image richly dressed, by which perhaps would signify Ceres. There are records of children being gifted pins and ribbons and lace for their hard work, as well as adults being gifted, as I said before, alcohol for their hard labour. And a poem around the same time written by a poet called Thomas Tusser, The End of the Harvest. This poem referred to lords of the harvest, as well as other harvest royalty, which indicated that in several areas it was quite a popular rite celebration to perform to actually elect royalty. So you might have a harvest queen and a harvest king. And that is reflected as well in the idea of crowning the last corn. In terms of the harvest queens, there were only several mentions, according to Ronald Hutton. And one of those mentions was in 1614, William Brown described them as crowned with chaplets of blooms which they themselves had made. That's recorded in the Shepherd's Pipe. And in Paradise Lost, Milton recorded of choicest flowers a garland to adorn her tresses and her rural labours crown, as reapers oft are wont their harvest queen. And then there is the reference to Ceres, and this again potentially could have been the corn doll, the sheaf doll. So the poet Thomas Tusser wrote a rhyme about farming, and this was the first record that we could see of this Harvest Home celebration getting really big. Thomas Tusser details in the rhyme that a good harvest lord should give their employee gloves, as well as the importance of having a huge celebration at the end where everyone can feast. So the rhyme goes as follows. In harvest time, harvest folk, servants and all, should make altogether good cheer in the hall, and fill out the black bool of bleeth to their song, and let them be merry all harvest time long. Once ended thy harvest, let none be beguiled, please such as did help thee, man, woman and child. Thus doing, with alway such help as they can, thou winnest the praise of the labouring man. It's also detailed that the ploughman should be gifted a goose. Once again, as with Lunasa, we see lots of skill coming into play with contests and games being played amongst friends and family and workers and their lords, etc. So you had people coming together and celebrating, partying, the similar kinds of stuff to Lunasa. Very similar in that way. And Ronald Hutton also records in Stations of the Sun how the last sheaf of corn was collected in many communities, and this was turned into a corn dolly or a sheaf dolly, and often named the Callieach. The Callieach is a Scottish deity. As Ronald Hutton records in Stations of the Sun, the Callieach was also referred to as the neck, the old sow, the crone, the witch, the bitch, many other words that were intended to be quite nasty and quite scary. It was said that this figure was supposed to scare the children. I think it was a lot about keeping people in line and not misbehaving. I think that's probably where it comes from. I know there are other crone deities similar to the Callieach, and they all have their different stories and different folklore. It's very, very interesting that the Callieach comes in at this time of year, but of course, because we are in the waning part of the year, it is understandable because we are moving into winter, into that waning portion, and so we do see the Crone, and it is a really, really beautiful time to work with the Crone. And you can work with Crone energy on its own, or you could work with a particular deity. I also imagine that the corn dolly, the sheaf doll, the Callieach would have been an amulet to ward off any evil spirits. I think it was meant to protect and ward against anything that might harm the harvest. So taking that last sheaf and, in a sense, protecting your harvest with that sheaf. I feel like it was a protective measure. So there are other deities that you can work with at this time of year. Of course, as we've discussed, Mabon, and then the Callieach, and then deities like the Dagda and the Morrigan, of course. Hecate is a fantastic deity to work with at this time of year, as well as Demeter, Persephone. We also see, of course, the Green Man and the Horned God being revered at this time of year. Dionysus and Osiris as well are all figures associated with this time of year. In the Elizabethan Sheerburn ballads, there was a ballad named The Merry Life of the Countryman. And in this ballad, there's a lot of detail about how this process should work and what the workers should do, etc., and what is the right way to be performing these harvests. It reads as follows. When corn is ripe, with tabor and pipe, their sickles they prepare, and wagers they lay how much in a day they mean to cut down there. And he that is quickest, and cutteth down cleanest the corn, a garland trim they made for him, and bravely they bring him home. And when in the barn, without any harm, they have laid their corn, in heart they sing high praises to him, that so increase their gain. And unto the parson, their pastor and teacher also, with hearts most blithe, they give their tithe, their duties full well they know. And then in various different locations in England, there were different recordings in gentlemen's magazines and other pieces of literature about the customs, etc., and what was given and what was done. So, for instance, in the Wokingham Estate Records in Cumbria, it was recorded that Sir Patricius Curran of Wokingham provided not just money and food, but also a piper to play at the fields for the 9 to 17 days which the harvest required each year between 1628 and 1643. Ronald Hutton continues, over in Anglesey at the same period, the gentleman farmer Robert Bulkeley paid his hands but gave them no food. And that's been recorded in the diary of Bulkeley of Drownley, Anglesey. I find it very interesting to look into Devon, and there was a record in a gentleman's magazine about Dartmoor. In parts of Devon in 1816, no money was given to the reapers. Instead, a crowd of labourers would converge upon a farm which required their work. They would be served a large lunch, drinking of beer or cider in the late afternoon, and supper at the farmhouse, followed by more alcohol until 2 or 3 in the morning. So very, very, very drunken affair. So that was recorded in a gentleman's magazine as well as the Guide to Dartmoor. So that's really, really interesting. It goes on into lots of different areas. If you want to get into that, then definitely read Ronald Hutton's Stations of the Sun. So what's really interesting is there is some scholarly writing by Wilhelm Mandhart. This was written in the 1860s, and it records there being some speculation that the trees were in fact inhabited by spirits, which is something, you know, a lot of animist witches do believe these days. That was something I would imagine to be true, but the fact that there could be demons that could kind of curse your land, essentially, or curse your crops. This is something that was argued by this scholar, and Ronald Hutton writes, Wilhelm Mandhart argues that, as primitive peoples thought that the trees were animate, then they ought to have regarded the spirits of crops as animate likewise, functioning as fertility demons. This evidence was used to show that the last sheaf of corn should definitely be treated well and blessed, essentially. The last bunch of corn to be reaped as especially significant. This then led on to the idea that the last sheaf of corn or grain inhabited the energy and the spirit of the entire field. So that last sheaf was really significant and should have been treated with a lot of respect, a lot of honour, a lot of reverence and celebration and blessings, essentially. And some of this work by Wilhelm Mandhart was influenced by a British academic called Sir Edward Taylor, as well as Sir James Fraser. Then Sir James Fraser continued to labour upon this point and even went so far as to say that the last sheaf should be named, and that is where the relevance of calling it the Callieach derived from. So in the Golden Bough, James Fraser does suggest that the reapers of the corn would be fearful of this corn because it was so powerful, and that the corn would have been treated with real respect and reverence after it was collected. It was also said by Sir James Fraser that if it was delivered to someone, it could cause them ill will or bad fortune. However, if it was fed to an animal or ploughed into a field or taken into a home, it could bestow great blessings. So that is almost very strange. It's like if you give it to someone who doesn't want it or doesn't know about it, then it can curse them inadvertently, but it can also bless you if you take it into your home. I think that that's quite strange, but I do think that essentially it is a protector of your corn. So I guess it could have been used to do whatever you wanted it to do. Because it's inhabited by this spirit, that spirit would essentially either bless you or curse your rival. I don't think that it's surprising at all that there was so much superstition around this last sheaf of corn because, as I said, it was a time for great celebration, but also kind of anxiety and fear, and a little bit like what we spoke about in Lunasa as well. This sort of going into the waning part, not really knowing what's going to happen, if you're going to have enough, and that just sort of anxiety around whether or not, you know, you're okay. And I think we can see these themes reflected in our real lives because, of course, as with the competitions and games in Lunasa, in summer we have school sports days, and in September now we have this harvest and we have a going back to school. It's a time of newness, but it's a different kind of newness. It's a newness, but it's also a review. It is similar to the spring equinox, but different because, of course, spring we are coming into the light half of the year. With autumn we are falling back into the darker half of the year. There is a waning. And so while there's this balance because of the balance between light and dark, night and day, that we have at the spring equinox as well, there is a different energy. It's a different kind of newness to the spring equinox newness. It's a newness that invites stillness and going inward. And so we can see this anxiety being reflected in the superstition around the sheaf of corn. So I think it depends on how you see that last sheaf. So I think that it's almost a bit like you bless yourself depending on how you see the last sheaf of corn, and if you hold on to it too tightly, it may not be an abundant harvest. And I guess the corn dolly is that superstition that you create a corn dolly to bless, to protect, and it is able to do that for you if you believe it does. In calendar customs in 19th and 20th century Dorset, Peter Robson records what was first noticed in 1770s when Lord North, crossing East Devon, was frightened by the shouting which he mistook for demonstrations against new style attacks. And this shouting was the famous crying of the corn. So it was a ritual that was done to celebrate the harvesting of the last sheaf of corn. And there were different things that were shouted. The company would bow and then shout, "A neck, a neck, a neck. We have one," a certain number of times. In North Devon, the words were sung in a prolonged and beautiful harmony. In Cornwall, at an unnamed place, the exchange, "I've gotten it. What hast gotten? I've gotten the neck." In Western Dorset, the chant, "We haven't," was performed in the farmyard without using a tuft of corn. And these were recorded in a number of different sources that Ronald Hutton lists. One thing that I thought was really, really interesting, some Scottish folklore that Ronald Hutton recorded, was, of course, again, the last sheaf was a trophy, something that was highly prized. And in parts of Scotland, in Wales, in Devon, a game was derived whereby the reaper, who usually got the corn, so usually also a man, would have to try to get that sheaf of corn onto the table inside the house without the maids, who were ready and waiting with water, throwing water all over him and the corn. So quite a funny, like, I can imagine quite flirty kind of game going on there. That was recorded in Welsh Folklore and Folk Custom by T. Gwyn Jones. I find that one really, really funny. So there were also a number of folk songs that were recorded from different regions that Ronald Hutton has included, and I love them, so I'm going to read some of them. "We have ploughed, we have sowed, we have reaped, we have mowed, we have brought home every load, hip, 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 harvest home." So that was in East Anglia, and other variations were harvest home, harvest hum, harvest home. We've ploughed, we've sown, we've reaped, we've mown, harvest home, harvest home. And another favourite, the barley mow. "Here's a health to the barley mow, here's a health to the man who very well can both harrow and plough and sow. When it is well sown, see it well mown, both raked and gravelled clean, and a barn to lay it in. Here's a health to the man who very well can both thrash and fan it clean." So there is more reference here to the Roman goddess of grain, Ceres, and it is noted by Ronald Hutton that Elizabethan observers of this time would have understood that significance between the Roman festivals and how it's sort of continuing. Ronald Hutton notes here that in 1836, a lady observing the crying of the neck in West Devon could conclude that it was a relic of Druidry. And in the 1960s, a folklorist, George Erwart, who we have referenced in these videos before, did describe the last sheaf and the harvest queen as representing the old pagan corn goddess. In Ireland, the fall equinox is known as Mean Forma. I'm so sorry, I probably said that wrong again. I usually do. And from Dylan, early Irish literature, a tree of apples, great its bounty, like a hostel vast, a pretty bush, thick as a fist of tiny hazelnuts, a green mass of branches. So another thing that's really, really interesting to note is that Maria Gimbutas, the historian, notes in the gods and goddesses of old Europe that there were images, figures found depicting a deity with both male and female genitals, which is really, really interesting. And we have this image of the Cornucopia as well, which has both phallic and sort of receptive images within it. So I think that's really, really interesting as well. It's like the meeting of two halves almost, becoming one. And so some herbs and correspondences that we could talk about this time of year include nuts, of course, hazelnuts, as mentioned in the poem, and of course apples, which beautiful apple harvest at this time of year, blackberries, brambles, rose, passionflower, acorns, of course, benzoin, fern, all kinds of grains, wheat, barley, honeysuckle, calendula, marigold, milkweed, myrrh, sage, Solomon's seal, thistle, milk thistle, all kinds of root vegetables as well are beautiful at this time of year, and you can of course make lots and lots of delicious, yummy kitchen witchery with those things. I think passionflower is a really, really beautiful herb to use at this time of year, especially when you're thinking about abundance and blessings and gratitude, I think, because passionflower is a really, really beautiful herb to use for attracting love and friendship, as well as sort of having really, really good communication and bringing blessings to your home. And it said if you sprinkle some across your doorway, you will invite blessings into your home. So that's something you can do at this time of year as well. So there are so many amazing ways to celebrate this time of year. I think getting out into nature always, getting crafty, getting creative, arts and crafts of course, baking. I love baking bread, cakes, crumbles, pies, everything autumnal, cinnamon of course, and spice and sugar and all of those beautiful things that you can work with. I love this book as well. It's really, really nice with kids. This is Circle Round, Raising Children in Goddess Traditions by Starhawk, Diane Baker and Anne Hill. For Mabon, or the fall equinox, we have the story of the goddess and the god Mabon. So there's the story of Mabon here. Stephanie is mentioned, Inanna is also mentioned here. We have discussions about the altar. Then there is the story of Mabon, the son of Modron, retold by Starhawk, and it's a beautiful illustration as well there. So you can read these with your kids or just to yourself. And then another story, an animal blessing and a pet blessing here. A song written by Diane Baker and Aaron Feldman. Family Thanksgiving feast. Restoring the balance rituals, so take a walk, pick up trash, bake something delicious, serve at a soup kitchen. These are beautiful, beautiful things you can do to give back at any time of year, but especially at this time of year. Harvest necklaces, a mobile, sin animals using applesauce and cinnamon, a leaf chain, Mabon wreaths, harvest candle holders, they sound really fun. Harvest rainbow, Mabon bread, oh my goodness. So this Mabon bread has cinnamon in it, brown sugar, eggs, cornmeal, it sounds delicious, sugar, pretzels, oh my gosh. Oh, we might have to make those at some point. But I am going to be sharing with you my recipe for a delicious, warming blackberry crumble pie, and it is absolutely delicious. You are going to love it. Mabon apples, these sound amazing. They're basically baked apples. Lots of recipes in here. These are just gorgeous. So this book I would really, really recommend if you want to do things with your family. So now I'm going to share with you my beautiful recipe, and so I really hope you enjoy it. I'm going to start by making my sweet short crust pastry, and I'm using 250 grams of plain flour. I want to imbue my intentions for the season ahead. I ask that we step into autumn with love in our hearts, peace in our minds and hearts and bodies, that we respect one another and work together to keep this home happy and safe for our children. As with all of my recipes that I've shared on the channel, I do like to spend time with each ingredient and imbue my intention of peace and love and abundance and prosperity in my home. Blessings. I'm sifting the plain flour now into my bowl. And now I'm adding 75 grams of icing sugar that's also been sifted. I believe this is powdered sugar in the States. And again, spending time with it and thinking of my intentions. And sugar, of course, is going to sweeten this working. So again, I'm sifting this. You do a pinch of salt. This is to protect our home. For protection, as I will it, so shall it be. Stirring all of those intentions up within this pastry. And I have 125 grams of cubed ice cold butter. And I'm going to add that in. And this is for the richness, the abundance, the fat of the land. Rubbing the butter into the dry ingredients, and here I have 1 large egg, and again I'm imbuing my intention for these life potential and blessings. So now I'm going to fork the egg through the flour and butter mixture, and I'm going to bring it all together into a dough and start to use my hands, and again thinking about my intention the entire time. And of course, if you need to, you can use about 25 to 50 mils of milk if you need more liquid, or you could use water as well. Next, I am making the crumble topping, and I'm using 200 grams of plain flour and 75 grams of soft brown sugar, as well as 50 grams of demerara sugar and 100 grams of butter. And I'm also incorporating ginger and cinnamon ground spices into this mixture, as well as salt. Again, as I've said before and in all of my videos where I create recipes, I am taking my time with each ingredient and imbuing my intentions and blowing my intentions, speaking my intentions out loud, and really thinking about the correspondences of each ingredient as well as my intention and how each ingredient is going to serve this working. After I've mixed up all of the dry ingredients together, of course, I'm going to rub in my butter again, and this was 100 grams worth of butter. So using the fingertips, I rub this together, and I like to do it by hand because, again, you can spend time thinking about your intention and really imbuing that into your recipe. So now I have my blackberries, and in Corinne Boyer's Plants of the Devil, the blackberries feature prominently. I'm adding a couple of teaspoons or so of corn flour so that I don't get a soggy bottom, as well as sugar, and I'm kind of eyeballing this, as well as cinnamon and ginger. And I also added a little bit of vanilla extract and some maple syrup. Again, I went by eye and by taste, and then some lemon juice, just 1 teaspoon. Now, what I also wanted to do was reduce the syrup. So I sifted the berries, reduced the syrup in the pan, as you can see. Next, I'm rolling out my dough. Now, I placed my pastry dough into the freezer to firm up, and actually you're not supposed to do it for quite as long as I did. I think I left it for about 40 minutes, and really 20 minutes in the freezer would do it. So I'm rolling it out to about 1.5 centimeters thick, and I am just working it into my pie dish, which was 20 centimeters diameter. And I'm just making like a really rustic edge. Using a fork, I'm now going to prick the base of my pastry, and then I'm going to blind bake it. And I don't have any baking beads, so I'm going to use lentils on top of some greaseproof paper to blind bake this in the oven. I have blind baked this pie, and I did this with some greaseproof paper, and I used lentils because I didn't have baking beads. When I lifted it up, however, the bottom was still quite soggy, so I put it in alone for a little bit without the baking parchment, and it did sort of rise up a little bit, but then sort of sunk back down again, so it was okay. And then I added some egg wash to it, you can see the sheen, and put it back in for another 5 minutes or so just to set that. So hopefully I won't get a soggy bottom. I had quite a lot of juices from the blackberries, and what I did was I took this juice with the corn flour, I put it in a pan and just heated it up so it became this kind of syrup rather than just the juices, because I want to avoid getting a soggy bottom. So I'm going to assemble this now, and we're going to get it in the oven, and hopefully it will work out beautifully. So I've got my beautiful blackberries. I suppose I could have a few more actually. I think this will be plenty with the crumble topping. I'm going to place this gorgeous syrupy goodness on top. I actually did use a couple of teaspoons in my coffee because I was curious what blackberry syrup would taste like in my coffee, and it was very nice, very fruity, different. It was like having like a different kind of coffee bean, you know, but yeah, sweet. I don't usually have sugar in my coffee, so that was quite a treat. Just sort of spread that out a little bit. I'm so excited for this. And then the crumble topping, I think there's definitely too much here, so we're just gonna see. Just thinking of all of the beautiful blessings that autumn and harvest is going to bring to us as a family. All of the joyful celebrations and parties and events that we can enjoy together. Just things like pumpkin picking and going for nice long crisp walks and along the beach or in the forest, and going to the hot chocolate shop, which we absolutely love to do. There's like this incredible hot chocolate shop in town called Coco's, and they do the most amazing chocolate. It's a chocolatier based in Dorset, which is a county just over from Devon, and they have a shop in Exeter, and it's absolutely gorgeous. I've crumbled this. There is quite a lot of crumble. I just love to have plenty of crumble on my pies. This is the amount of crumble we use when we have a larger crumble pan, but because this has obviously got the pastry as well, I don't want it to be like too much, but at the same time I want it to be generous. So what do you think?
Oh, it's nice.
A little bit more? Shall I use it all?
No, not too much. It's just
okay.
Too much crumble. Okay.
Now it's gonna go into the oven. I use 170 because our oven is really hot, but like basically 180. So here it is. It baked for about 30 to 35 minutes in the end, and it was so delicious. So I really hope that you enjoyed seeing that. It was so good. We just absolutely adored it. It was so amazing. I highly recommend that you try that recipe out. And if you're keen to get hold of some exclusive Book of Shadows pages with some of the rituals and recipes that I'm creating on this channel, then do go over to my Patreon and join. It would be great to have you, and there you can get that bonus content as well as an exclusive Discord. And I'm also sharing PDFs of my full and new moon tarot spreads, as well as a full forecast for the full and new moons each month, and that includes some ritual ideas as well as herbs and crystals that you can use within your practice. So some lovely things that you can do at this time of year is of course baking, crafting. There are so many amazing crafts on Pinterest, so I would definitely encourage you to go check that out. Any crafts with children, you can make little lanterns, you can do leaf prints, you can create felt leaves, garlands, wreaths, all kinds of beautiful crafts. Last year I created a beautiful autumn wreath. I will share some footage with you. Also in my recent haul, I shared a few DIY projects that I've worked on in the past at this time of year, including felting pumpkins, so cute. I just love crafts, and I do love doing things like this with my kids. I think painting is so fun, just getting creative. There are so many ideas on Pinterest, and I'm also going to be making a special autumn fairy, so I'm going to share that with you as well. So I collected over time, and some this season, these beautiful golden brown leaves, and there's a little bit of dried St. John's wort there, and some pine cones and conkers and acorns, and I'm just sort of like playing around a little bit to try and figure out how I can make my fairy. And I settled on these two beautiful leaves to make the wings, so I am using some string to bind them together, and they will form the spine and the main structure of my fairy. So I'm using a hot glue gun as well to attach everything together, and again I'm just sort of taking a look at what I've got and deciding on the best shape. I want it to look like my fairy is wearing like a beautiful gown, and so I think that using one of these pine cones is probably what I'm going to do, and then using the St. John's wort as the bodice part of the dress and the acorn as the little head. I actually realised here that I was running low on my glue for my glue gun, so the glue stick wasn't long enough for me to push the glue, so I waited until I received some more glue for my glue gun, and I continued over here. I've got some beautiful wild botanicals that I have foraged recently, and I'm just playing with them to see how they look, because I think they create a sort of really beautiful headdress and sort of hairstyle behind the fairy's head. So I'm attaching that to my acorn. So I've attached the St. John's wort to one of my pine cones, and the acorn with the headdress to that little mini pine cone that's the bodice, and I also added a string so that I can hang her up, and here she is, the finished autumn fairy. I think she looks so pretty next to my little witch on my kitchen herbal apothecary. I absolutely love her. And finally, I often delve into this book, and I'm going to be completely honest with you, I have not had time to look into it, so let's do it together. Because I like to do my research, I like to make my notes and have everything kind of prepared for these videos, but for this Sabbath, I am behind in my reading. So I've talked about this book a little bit on my channel before in other videos. This is The Noble Art by Tiffany Lazic, and essentially this goes into more of a psycho-spiritual approach towards the Wheel of the Year, and it follows on from her book, The Great Work, which I don't have. I actually got this through the Witches box book subscription, and they also sent out The Great Work, I think maybe last year or the year before, but I don't have that book, but I would like to get it because it's fantastic. Tiffany Lazic is just incredible. I would highly recommend that you get this if you are interested in going deeper with working with the Sabbats, or working with them in a different way, in a way that is more attuned with you and your rhythms and the rhythms of where you are and things that are coming up for you in your life. So I think definitely working with some of these ideas will be really, really helpful in a psycho-spiritual kind of way, and for shadow work. So as I said earlier, Tiffany does talk about here how whilst Lunasa is similar to Mabon, there is a lighter tone to Lunasa because it is warmer and we are still in summer, whereas we're starting to head into the waning part of the year. As I mentioned as well, reviewing things is really important, and here Tiffany refers to it as appraisal. So things that Tiffany suggests we can ask ourselves: what do we keep? What do we release? What is abundant and sustainable? What comes from fear and maybe more aligned with the tendency to hoard? this is really interesting because I think it does tap into that kind of anxiety we might have about something, holding on to something so tightly, holding on to that last sheaf of corn. I think if you are holding on to it with that fear, it could curse you. However, if you are not holding on to it with that idea, it can bless you. These are just some of my thoughts around it and how it might play into some shadow work, you know? So Tiffany refers to the inner child and parenting with the higher self. One thing that I really would like to do is read Diana Rachel's Mabon book from Llewellyn. It's one of the Llewellyn series books. I really would like to get that book because Diana Rachel is a fantastic writer. Tiffany does refer to this book, as well as a book on the Autumn Equinox by Ellen Dugan. That must have been one of the older ones. Yes, 2005. Here Tiffany has gathered this information from these two books, I should imagine, and has discussed Entdeckenfest in Germany, Harvest Thanks Festival, Benishon in Switzerland, Thanksgiving in Canada on the second Monday in October, far earlier than the American Thanksgiving, which is held on the fourth Thursday in November. And in the Netherlands, this is really interesting to me because I have ancestry in the Netherlands. The Harvest Festival is known as Dankdag voor Gewas en Arbeid, Thanksgiving Day for Crops and Labour. And then there are more. So that's really interesting. So then it goes on to the shadow of the wounded healer and quotes Jung, the analyst must go on learning endlessly. It is his own hurt that gives the measure of his power to heal. This and nothing else is the meaning of the Greek myth of the wounded physician. Now, for me, I really feel my shadow work is deepening at this time. I need to dive deep, and this is the work I know I have to do. The light of the wonder healer, again, more on Carl Jung and individuation, more work to do. This is gold, I'm telling you. Oh my gosh. So then there's a meditation here to deepen into the practice and some affirmations. I hope for nothing, I fear nothing, I am free. Beautiful. There is also a golden gratitude ritual in this book, which sounds absolutely stunning and references the Cornucopia again. And then practice gratitude and acts of thankful appreciation. So again, like I said at the start, I think that once you've celebrated a few of these Sabbats, you know, I started celebrating the Sabbats when I was fairly young because I came to the craft when I was about 11. I didn't have any books on them then, so it was just learning from the internet, really, mostly, and, you know, some of the little tidbits that are in some of the older books. There was less information available, definitely, but I remember baking and things on the Sabbats, and I just loved it. But I think the more that you celebrate, these themes are kind of intuitive. You feel it within your body. You know, it's like reflected in the way you are, and you already know. It's like now that I'm studying astrology, I see what's happening with the planets. Before even maybe an aspect happens or a particular transit, I'm already feeling that energy of that, and things are just aligning perfectly in terms of like what the planets are doing and then what's happening in my life. It actually makes complete sense, and it's so interesting when you start to learn about it and then you can see it happening in your life, and it is just the best way to learn. So I do think that the more and more you read about this, the more and more you read about the Sabbats, the more you're going to get out of them because you're going to enjoy more. So that's why I started doing these series. This isn't supposed to be exhaustive. Of course, I would love that if it was, but it's never going to be. I don't have any of the Llewellyn Sabbat series apart from the Beltane one, which I haven't finished, but I did enjoy dipping into at that time of year. I will definitely pick up the others though. That is going to be something that I would aim to do next year and to continue to read because I think it's fascinating. And also rereading this stuff every year, I think I mentioned in other videos, you know, I get these books out every single Sabbat and go over this stuff again and again and again, and it's sort of, then you remind yourself, and it's like learning it all over again. I love it because I think, you know, a lot of it goes in your head and then it falls out, especially when you've got kids. Like, I don't know if anyone else feels like that if they've got kids, but yeah, definitely. So learning never stops. But I have really enjoyed sharing